Hey, welcome to Fire Engineering's Humpday Hangout and to our show, the issues and challenges in today's fire service. We've got another show, a great show lined up for you today. I'm Chief Rick Lasky, along with my good friend and Humpday Hangout co-host, Louisville Assistant Chief Terry McGrath. That's usually our regular lead-in with this, and we're joined by the rest of our Humpday team, Chief John Salka and Chief Scott Thompson, and we've got a special guest with us, one of Terry's captains from Louisville, BJ McWhorter, and we're going to get to BJ in a second here. Before we go any further, got to mention today's show wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for some great folks out there. And I just want to mention something about the group that's bringing today's show to everybody, and that's the Safariland group. A lot of different products if you go to their website, but one in particular for the fire service is a communications headset that's awesome. And I grabbed this once before, and it's worth reading again to get you know a little bit about what they do and about what they stand for, and it's especially when it comes to this headset. So for firefighters in a hazard zone, message clarity is often the difference between mission success and failure. When answering the call, they deserve a communication system that is designed for the harshest conditions and loudest environments, thermally tested and certified. The Red Line series, that's what you're looking for, from Safariland delivers unparalleled message clarity for every task at every scene, every time. And the Safariland group, to give you a little idea who they are, is a leading global provider of a broad range. If you go to their website at safariland.com, you'll see what I'm talking about. A broad range of safety and survivability products designed for the public safety, military, professional, and outdoor markets. They're one of their mottos, and this one I loved, I grabbed this one right away, is "Together we save lives." Is what they do. They're headquartered out of Jacksonville, Florida. But again, we want to thank Safariland for helping us bring this to you today. Again, safariland.com. You won't be disappointed when you go check out their website. I wasn't. So, and that being said, afternoon, guys.
Hey, good morning, afternoon.
And Chief Thompson, we were talking about earlier. I think he's in Bangkok or somewhere overseas. So he's a little bit delayed, but Chief McGrath, Terry, you want to introduce your guest, buddy?
Yeah. So, for starters, if you've ever listened to Chief Salka when he talks and he's teaching or he tells a story, he always talks about Billy or Tommy. Like I always thought I'm going to have a T-shirt made and said I want to be Billy, because you always talk about him in a really good light, and it's always your go-to guy. And so I brought Billy. So when Chief said we were going to do a show about hose and nozzles and stuff, of course, I'm panicking because I'm thinking, man, there's a litany of things I don't know that much about, and it might be hose and nozzles might be right up there on that list. But so this morning, our one of the college academies is at our training field, and so one of the real active instructors with that program is Captain Billy McWhorter, who works for Louisville. And as luck would have it, they're out here doing some hose drills today. And so I stopped by to get briefed up on my hoses and nozzles. I had to ask Billy a couple of questions about, because we have recently undergone some changes in our hose package. And so I wanted to verify that I didn't get on here misstep. So as I was talking to him, and I thought, hey, it's lunchtime and I know you're not doing anything. So anyway, so Billy came on here, and he is my Billy. He's my go-to guy, and when it comes to hose, nozzles, and he's the guy that I rely on. And we handed that over to him a couple of years ago. He's done a phenomenal job, and so this is Captain Billy McWhorter, BJ, as we affectionately know him as. And anyway, I'm glad he was able to. I was able to strong arm him into the room and come on with us.
Well, BJ, welcome aboard, and for our viewers. And I've mentioned him, Scott, you know this, and Terry and John, I've mentioned his dad several times, and we all have those favorite firefighters in our lives, especially those from mutual aid or automatic aid departments. When you go somewhere, they show up, they salute, they're ready to go. They don't care what the assignment is. They don't care what the task, there's no bitching, there's no complaining. They work their asses off. And that's BJ's dad, Billy Mack, which we always call him. And I always tell that story, and John, you'll appreciate this one, Scott. I told this when I did a class over in Flower Mound where he was. We were on a job, and me, years ago, I wasn't very good at wearing not just my face piece, my whole air pack. And we're inside a job. We had good fire, and it's time for them to change out to go out. And I go ahead, I'm fine. Just leave me the line. Just go ahead. And he's looking at me. I go, you could go. He's like, I don't. I said, you could go. And he's looking at me. And again, if there was a video, you go, Lasky, you're some kind of dumbass, which I hear all the time at my house. Anyway, because I didn't have my face piece on, and I actually apologized to him. We're doing in front of this whole department. We're doing a company officer cab because he was just looking out for me, take care of things. But always one of my favorite guys to see. Unless you were playing softball against Flower Mound and he was on the opposing team, then I didn't want to see him. So BJ, welcome, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Well, and I almost forgot, and Mark, our producer, would jump on me. Make sure if you got any questions, we will we'll try our best to get to them. Sometimes we can't get to them all. Just make sure if you're going on social media to any of our posts, add hashtag FE Talk for Fire Engineering Talk so we can get to it. But our topic today is water on fire, and we kind of gave a little subhead as all things nozzles, hose, and streams. And I'm going to throw this right to Chief, to John Salka. One of your favorite, I know it's one of my favorites, but one of your favorite things to hear, and I think this is a great way to start off this whole conversation. All the years, in New York City, and as a chief in your Valley department, but all years in the Bronx, stand out in the street, your favorite phrase to hear from Timmy or any of your guys from the nozzle was what? We've got water on the fire.
I was the one usually saying it, not listening to it. Oh, you mean as a chief?
Well, but I mean, you've talked about that how many times, John, that was it's that little anxious feeling when the guys are going to work and things aren't turning. All of a sudden you hear that phrase, 8 to 3, whatever, we have water on the fire. And it's almost like, it's not done, but it's just nice to know.
Right. Just takes the pressure off a little bit. You're on the road to recovery. Yeah.
So lead us, John. What, we've talked about this before in a couple other shows, talking about, stretches and hose beds, which we'll probably get to a little bit later. But what does it get for an engine company working for you to get to that point? What does it take to be the successful? We'll start off with that one before we even get to all the hose and loads, to be the successful fire attack group in your eyes.
I mean, you know what? I think you and I had this discussion the other day. We were talking about engine operations and how many things. Actually, it was when we were deciding on this topic for this show. And, I said there's so many things to be in a good engine company. There's so many features. There's so many factors. There's so many tactics. There's so many things you got to be able to do right. When most of the dopes in the truck think, well, you just pull the hose and open a nozzle and the fire goes out. Like people think, oh, well, the truck has to know all this technical stuff, and the engine just has to pull the hose in and put the fire out. And maybe if you own a meat store across the street and you're watching a fire, maybe you might think that, because that might be what it look at. But there really is a lot. There really is a lot for just an ordinary engine in an ordinary town. There's a lot to know. There's a lot you got to get done right to get a good hose line into a building that's on fire with adequate pressure and put the fire out. I mean, it sounds simple, but there's a lot to it. There really is.
Well, and we'll go. Let's throw this, Scott and Terry and John, right to BJ. So you're teaching, an academy class or whatever. We've always talked about. I've said it for years. The only thing that matters on your pumper is the hose and the water. Everything else on there is extra. I know we're all. I'm the geek. I love EMS. We all know that there's a whole lot of other things on that rig that are important. But when it comes down to it, from the old days to today, the only thing that matters is the water and the hose. I've always talked to my guys, even where I'm the trained officer now, is the importance of getting water delivered to the fire. No matter how you do it, what you do, what your department's SOGs are, the quickest we get water to the seat of fire, everything gets better. What do you impress on the rookies that you're teaching, BJ, in the academy classes when it comes to nozzles, water, stretches, and everything?
The big thing that we try to emphasize is that there's no black and white hose stretch that's going to work for every scenario. That as a nozzle firefighter, as the one making that stretch, you got to learn to operate in that gray and understand that first thing I got to do when I step off that rig is I got to size up the building, where the fire's at, where it's going. And then the next thing I'm looking at is my hose size up, right? To what kind of obstacles do I have? What's my setback? How far am I going to have to stretch from the rig to the door? How much working length am I going to need to bring inside me? And that's all decisions that have to happen, split seconds. And it's not something that you should only be thinking about when you're pulling up to a fire. We try to emphasize when you're driving around, going to the grocery store, size up your stretches. When you're going on an EMS call, hey, how am I laying my hose out, for this structure right here? And then just being confident with it. If you're having to think about every fold you got to make, what coupling you got to bring to the door, what you're not doing at that point is looking at the conditions that are changing and evolving, right? So we want that to be such muscle memory and reflex that I'm able to size up the big picture while I'm doing that.
Well, and I love what you said. I love the phrase, you got to be versatile, the versatility in your hose stretches. There are some places that carry strictly 1 3/4 and 2.5, and then they have LDH or whatever, but they have some different loads. But you can't do anything, like you said, unless you know your buildings, unless you know where you're going and you're still, district or your town or whatever, because you can have one plan that's not going to work. Scott, you guys have all kinds of growth going on in the colony. How many different variations do you guys have on a fire engine in the colony when it comes to a fire attack?
Well, yeah, we have tremendous growth and a lot of challenges. What we did about 5 years ago is we said we want to understand the why, and we started from scratch, and we wanted to focus on everything from the hydrant forward. Totally redesigned our engines, totally redesigned our hose package, our nozzle package, and then we looked at our practices. So, we have a bunch of mid-rises. So we want to give our men and women as many options as we can, but we're also a very young department. We have inexperienced members, so we want to make the system easy to use. It's real hard to get overcomplicated in this. So we really try to cater to the working mind to do exactly what BJ said, is if we got a step-up officer, if we have a young firefighter, they can go through the, like a quarterback, if you will. Who's my primary receiver? What are my secondary? What's my third? What are my options? And so we really set it up, and we've had great luck with that. Our new engines, everybody loves. Our hose package is very effective. And like I say, up until we had the 5-alarm the other day, we're setting the ladder pipe a whole lot less than we used to. So in our little city, it's working pretty good. We went to smooth bores with the True ID hose. We were part of Dennis Legier's movement to get that hose. And then when we bought our new pumpers, we brought him in. We paid him money, brought him in for a week and say, Dennis, teach us how to maximize these engines to get everything we can out of them. And so for us, it's worked really well.
Well, and there's a lot of guys, and Terry, you and I have talked about it, and I there's just something popped in my head I want to ask John in a second. Terry, you and I have talked about this, and again, Scott just reminded me of it. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of guys out there that their great-great-grandfather taught their great-grandfather and their grandfather and their dad something back in the 40s that may not necessarily pertain to today. Smooth bores have been around a long time. Smooth bores work fine. My good buddy, our good buddy, John Salka says, look, fog nozzles have been putting out fires a long time. You have to know how to use them. And the days, and I say this all the time, if you've got some old codger telling you a 30-degree pattern of fog nozzle over your head is going to protect you from flash, or, I had a guy tell one of my guys, my department not too long ago, that he's afraid of smooth bores because they're dangerous and you get hurt and they won't protect them from a flashover, and he can't knock down this, he can't do that. And I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about, but you're arguing against physics when it comes down to some of this stuff. It's not even an argument with anybody on this panel. You're arguing against physics that, depending on how much water you bring, depending on how many BTUs you have, your line selection, where you're going, where it's at, big line versus small line, residential versus commercial, obviously. But Terry, you guys give your guys a lot of options as well. And that's something that our good friend, God rest him, Chief John Ashman did for you, specing your rigs, talking to the guys and finding out what their specific needs for the guys that are actually out there doing it came into play, didn't it?
Yeah, and you know the other thing, and I'll bring it up here, and Chief Salka said it. We said it on another show that we did about fog and smoothbore, but the what works for the Louisville Fire Department may not work for FDNY, and that may not work for Wichita West or the Colony. So you've got to do something that works for you, and the only way to know what works for you is to get out and actually test, do some research, establish some data, and I would encourage anyone and everyone to do that. And so, yeah, to your point, when Captain McWhorter took this over a couple of years ago, he came in and he said he had some thoughts and ideas of what he wanted to do. There were some things that he didn't like. He wanted to make things more efficient, like everything that he came forward with. And my only direction or my only advice was make sure you test it, because you're fixing to present a change to the fire service. So you better have your ducks in a row, because you are going to be challenged on every shift and on every hose, on every engine company that comes through here. Someone's going to challenge you because you're advocating a change. So, and he did a phenomenal job. And through what he did, we changed our hose load, which ultimately changed the way we're deploying the hose. He changed the hose that we are carrying. So we did away with the previous manufacturer and went with a different style hose. And so there was a lot of obstacles, and he did a great job, because he came down here and he did the research, and he could stand up in front of people and present them with data, not just, well, you know, it's, you know, I got a buddy that works somewhere and they said that didn't work, right? So it's got to be tailored to your organization. But the next thing is that you can't, it's not as simple as reading in a book and saying, well, we should use 1 3/4 with a Vindicator, which is our pre-connect. That's what we use, right? It may not work for you, but you don't know that until you go out to the field. Somebody goes out there and establishes benchmarks. What are we flowing? What pressures do we need to make it happen? Everything's great on a whiteboard. We can do the calculations all day long. But one thing John Ashman has taught all of us, when that pumper comes off the line, depending on how many elbows, depending on how many connections, and it's got to make 18 rights and lefts before it gets out of the right. So we know that the pump might say one thing, but what are you getting out of the nozzle at the end of the deployment? So it's all has to be kind of tailored to your organization.
Well, and how many times we talked about spec and rigs, and I want to throw this one to John, because Scott, Terry, myself, BJ, you know, I know speaking on behalf of Scott and Terry, not to leave BJ out, because I know he's been doing this for a while and grew up in the fire service, his dad. But, you know, Terry, Scott, we've been to a lot of fires, but I mean, you want to talk, let's talk to the guy who's been to more fires than if we lined up a stack full of people, and that's John Salka. And John, let's talk specifically about knowing your weapons. And we've done this before with you about knowing your nozzles, knowing your loads. You know, you very nicely explained, you know, hey, look, whether you have a fog nozzle, you have a smoothbore, whatever it is you use, just what Terry said, you got to know what the hell you have and how you're using it. And it's got to be specific for your department. But go ahead and talk about, you know, and you had Andy Fredericks, Andy Nozzles that worked for you in your company back at 48 Engine when you guys were fighting fires all the time. Talk about that, John. Talk about the variations with the nozzles, and in your experience, when things work and when they don't work.
You know, the interesting thing that Terry just brought up, which I you know completely agree with, but about, you know, what you do and what you use and how you do it is, you know, the important word in those sentences is you. How you do it, how your department does it, how your firefighters do it, how your training officer teaches it, how your company officers, you know, mandate their people work. And there's one more factor there. An additional factor is the fact that more than one way works. Even if you use to choose the, you know, a certain type of nozzle or a certain type of hose, whether it's fog or straight stream, whether it's, you know, this type of hose or that type of hose or different dimensions, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 different ways will probably work, but you pick of the ways that do work, you pick the ways that you like, the ones that you prefer. So preference preference is not a real technical thing. Preference is just how you feel about it. Sometimes guys are just, you know what, Chief? We like it this way. We like the hose pack the old way we used to do it. You know what? It works the old way, and it works the new way too that somebody came in and showed us. But we're going to stay with the old way. And you know, you started talking about the smooth bore and the fog tip, and you and I have talked about this. Probably all of us have. I can't even believe there was a discussion. I can't even believe Andy Fredericks wrote an article about the 50-year, 100-year, 75-year, 3,000-year fight over the smooth bore versus the fog nozzle. I don't even know what they're talking about. I don't know what they're talking about. Both of those nozzles work. There's pumpers all over the United States with one of them or both of them. FDNY, you're rarely going to see a fog tip. Other places, you might never see a smooth bore. And they all work just fine. They don't work the same. They work differently. They have different features, different abilities. Certainly, you can do stuff with a fog tip that you really can't do very well with a smooth bore nozzle. So that's another thing. Another point that Terry just made is, and we've all said it before on this show and elsewhere, and it all comes back down to training. You can do anything you want, but you guys have to know what they're doing. They have to be trained. I've looked at pumpers at shows. You go and you walk around the exhibit floor and you got a pumper out there and you look at the back of this pumper and I'm saying to myself, Rick, what the hell is that? How do you pull a hose off this rig? I've been around the fire service a little while and I see pumpers and I can't figure out how you're even going to get that hose off the rig. Never mind how they put it on there, right? But obviously the folks that ride around on that rig know how to do it, and that's fine. And my last point, without dominating the whole conversation, is, you know what? You could be detailed from 48 engine to 88 engine. And although the FDNY is pretty much standardized all the way around, how we pack our hose, how we pull it, and all that other stuff, there are a lot of fire departments that aren't like that. But you could pull a line and all of a sudden realize you got a fog nozzle in your hand, and you could have not a lot of experience. You could say, holy crap, I've never really used one of these. You think he's going to put the fire out? I do. It's not like when you pull a fog nozzle instead of a smooth bore, it's going to be like, holy shit, I hope this thing has an instruction manual. You can figure that stuff out. This isn't microbiology. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you end up with a smooth bore in your hand because some idiot the shift before you changed it over because the fog nozzle broke, you're still probably going to be able to manage just fine too. So you got to be flexible and you got to be able to, have a couple of different skills and abilities other than just the nozzle that you're used to using.
Well, and Scott, I want to ask you something and I got a question for BJ. I love these shows when we're sitting there and I'm sitting there in my head going, okay, I got to ask this, I want to ask this, and so on and so forth. So Scott, let's talk about how the colony, who is very successful at fighting fires, I tease you all the time in a good way that you're probably the fire chief I know that's a good friend that brags on his guys the most. I mean, there's people out there, Chief Taylor down in Pearland brags on his guys. There's some great, but you tend to go on, and it's justified because they work their asses off, they train. What is the success behind the colony with their firefight? We're talking, water in the fire and all things nozzles and hose loads and all that stuff. What do you attribute the success to their fire tech? Because look, there are some buildings you pull up and you go, we're not going to do much here because it's already through the roof. But even then, you keep it out of exposures. What do you think the key or keys to their success are?
This is microbiology. Let the men and women that are going to be using the tools help design the tools, right? And then try to, I like to think of things in kind of orderly fashion, like I said. And so it starts with our training. When we do in-doc, we spend a lot of time indoctrination in that first bit of time when we have somebody in the organization. And we start with the hose stuff right away. We try to be somewhat systematic with it. So as John said, we don't want the guy that's working at Station 1 gets overtime at Station 5 on a different shift, and the first thing the senior man says is, well, let me show you how we stretch a line over here. So we want to be somewhat uniformity, but that's based on what part of town they're in. But I think it's just, I got to get the culture word in there all the time. Let's just get a culture of engine operations and really emphasize the best way to get water on the fire quickly. And when firefighters see things going well, then that's an easy sell. And some of it's been luck, but when we made this big change, our fire started going pretty good. and it's sold to self. So my job is just to support, but let the men and women who are going to do the work have a say in not only the tools, but the way in which we do it. And that works really well. I think our next generation, we're gonna do away with cross lays, because the last, I don't know how many fires I've been to, they're not pulling them anymore. They want everything off the back. And they like that. And they enjoy that. So we see that natural evolution. So I listen to my people, and that's a discussion that we're going to have the next time we spec those rigs.
Well, and I love you said you listen to your people, because we've said this before, and we all tend to beat up on fire chiefs because it's easy to do that because they have a big giant target on their back. But some of them bring it on themselves, where they don't talk to their guys. They don't ask their guys. They don't say what works best. Why were things slow getting into that building? And they're like, they want to tell you, because Chief, we mentioned it 10 times. This hose load doesn't work in this area, exactly, too high or whatever.
Right,
and
say that high.
Yeah, up here. And I want to throw this one to BJ. BJ, I've said it for years, and we kind of hinted towards it already, that if you have to get when you talk about hose loads, if you have to get a picture book out, if you have to get a folder out and flip pictures over and drawings, I've always said if the hose load goes on difficult, in a difficult way, it's going to come off in a difficult way. Again, and I'm so glad Terry brought you on. You've been with us before, but let's have you're talking to those rookies about the importance of stretch a line. Talk about the importance of making sure it goes on easy and comes off easy. The stretch itself, what are some elements behind the stretch you teach right outside that training room at your academy and hands-on?
Number one we teach is, if it looks pretty, it pulls pretty, right? That's being that we take the time to put our folds in the right place, put our loops in the right place, pay attention to how we're loading it to make sure that it's going to come off the right way. And if you don't start with that, then you're setting yourself up for failure right off the bat. One of the things we did here when we switched to our current Minuteman hose load was we went to something simple that guys wouldn't hesitate to, stop in front of a house after an EMS call and say, hey, let's pull to that front door, because we can pull it off, have it loaded back on the rig, in a total of less than 10 minutes and get a really good training evolution out of it. If you have a very complicated hose lay, or it's hard to get it back into the box that it goes into, guys are going to really not want to pull it off and train with it. So the more convenient we can make it to go back on the rig, the more convenient it's going to be for us to pull it off the rig. And we've been very blessed here, and it was a culture that Chief Ashman started when he was speccing rigs. A lot of these new rigs, in my opinion, the hose is an afterthought to everything else. And it's like, hey, where are we going to put this cross lay? Where are we going to put this hose bed in the back? And that's how they end up, 10 feet tall. Or we have a cross lay that now we have to redesign a hose load just to make it fit into the pumper that we spec'd, instead of spec'ing our pumpers around what they're designed to do. Number one job, right? Get hose off of it and water on the fire.
Well, it's funny because we're getting all kinds of comments, and I think what you just said is going to be like a hashtag out there. If it goes on pretty, it comes off pretty, because everybody's popping on there about it. That's awesome. John,
hey, two great things. Go to a boat ramp on a weekend and watch husbands and wives back trailers down the boat ramp, and then stand around and watch firemen load hose. Yeah. It's awesome.
Watch it go back on.
Hey, John, talk about one of the things that, again, I think we need to cover is we're going to talk about manpower a second, but apparatus placement is a big thing. I know in your world, when it came to the ladder versus the engine, towards where Chiefs park their cars, because we've all seen some inexperienced folks plug up the front of the building or off to the side or whatever. Touch on that again, and it's easy for me because I say put the 18th Battalion helmet back on. You're in the Bronx. What do you expect from your chauffeurs that are driving in? Or go back to 48 engine with your favorite chauffeur, God bless him, who's in the front of your book, your dedication. The importance of apparatus placement for the engine, because we've already been touching on nozzles. We're talking about hose loads going on, going off, specing your rigs, knowing what you need in your area, the training aspects we'll get back to later, and that whole argument with fog. talk about apparatus placement. What you go, like I said, what are you expecting from them, or what were you looking for as you're turning the corner, pull up at a fire on your engine?
I mean, we could talk. We could talk all day just about apparatus placement, and the reason is apparatus placement is really connected to every other aspect. What size supply line do you have? How many people do you have riding on the rig? You know, what kind of stretches do you do? FDNY, the engine precedes the truck in all the time. Engine rolls out ahead of the truck out of the firehouse. If they meet at the intersection, the engine turns in the street ahead of the truck. Why? Because we stop in front of the building, unload our hand line, and the rig drives away. I don't want to say there is no apparatus placement, but our apparatus ends up 100, 200 feet down the block at a hydrant. So that works out easy for us. You go somewhere else, and I'll use the example of Wichita, where my son worked, very similar hose bed, very similar way of packing hose and even stretching hose, but they don't do that. They just pull up to the front of the building and they stay there. So now suddenly they're in Wichita, where you park that rig is important because you don't want to block out the truck, particularly if you have narrow streets, residential, large front lawns, a lot of trees, overhead wires. I mean, you could just go on and on and on with all the things that could obstruct a ladder truck. Well, the engine chauffeur has to think about that when he's pulling up. Although some of them don't. We've all been there where the guy pulls up, stops where he wants to, pops the air brake, and hops off the rig and starts doing something. And the rest of the street gets all bottled up behind him because there's a boar's head truck parked next to him and everything else. So, apparatus positioning is important. And again, it depends on what you're doing. You pull up to a factory or a commercial building or even an ordinary house that's fully involved, you can use your deck pipe. If you use your deck pipe, you got to park where the deck pipe can see the building. Some guys, again, they stop somewhere inconvenient. And then all of a sudden they get off the rig, they set the brake, they put it in pumps, and they realize, holy crap, the deck pipe's not going to reach from here. Why? Because they're not trained, because they're not planning ahead, because they're not being aware of the situational awareness where you are when you're pulling up. I love telling that story about Willie Tracy, God rest his soul, my chauffeur, who I've talked about many times here, passed away about a year ago. And we pulled up to a job right around the corner from the firehouse. You've all heard it already, but I'm telling it for the listeners. We pull up to a building right around the corner, and it's roaring. And I'm telling him, okay, stop right here. And I had to turn away from the building to look at him to tell him, Willie, stop right here. And he's like shaking his head. He's got the cigar in his mouth. He rolls like another 10 feet, and he stops. I'm shaking my head. I jump off the rig. We stretch a line, and before we even get into the front door, there's water going over my head. He's got the deck pipe going, because that's what he was thinking about when he was rolling up. I'm going to give him water for the line, but I'm going to get that deck pipe going too, protect the exposure. So there's so many aspects. There's so many different things that even just a single engine company can do. But there's so many variables. There's so many things that it's dependent on. Like I said, I started talking about Wichita. They only get 3 people. They got a driver, they got an officer, and they got one guy, one firefighter in the crew compartment, and they stretch their hose almost exactly and pack it almost exactly the same as the FDNY. They pull that line off the back. They happen to have a bundle that they drag to the front. We carry it in a little horseshoe, and they pop the bundle out in front of the building, and he's got 200 feet of hose in front of the building. One guy. They get some more people that come and help them and jump in line and stuff like that. But that's why apparatus positioning is quite I don't want to call it complex because I'm not a complex guy, but there's a lot of things that all interact, a lot of factors that have to be considered.
Well, and you mentioned, and that's why I wanted you to talk about it, because you bring up some great points about the difference between like Wichita, Kansas and the FDOI. Now you throw Chicago in there, and they're good. They're very good at getting out of the way for the truck company. But if you listen to them on the radio, they do a lot of 18s that on Roosevelt we're facing eastbound, northbound, southbound, because a lot of one-way streets are letting all the other companies know which way they're going. But not only do they have LDH off the back, they have 300 feet of it loaded on all their pumpers in the front. And we've talked about this before and shown some pictures. So the way they're lucky enough to have hydrants everywhere, if they don't pull off the back, they know they got a hydrant off the front, so they can stretch line off the front and get to a hydrant right away. So there's something just supply line wise that's different than where you're at. Scott, we're all blessed. When I was in the Metroplex, we had plenty of water. Where I'm at now, we have a handful of fire hydrants, or it depends on where we're going, mutual or automatic aid. So we've got to bring the water with us and make sure we have plenty coming, or we have to know where our hydrants are at. You guys, the importance of pre-planning and knowing where everything's at, especially with the growth that's going on in the colony and all the building, because I think your folks are doing a good job, the city there, to not outbuild the system. Some people have done that where they're going so fast that on the outskirts, there's just not enough water yet because they haven't finished the infrastructure for it. You guys are seeing some good positive results from the city helping you make sure you have enough water to even begin to fight the fire, right?
Yeah, really, it's a partnership. You know, we do the ISO thing, the inspection like everybody else, but yeah, our system is doing a fantastic job keeping up and making sure that they talk to us. We communicate to them. For the last, it just ended, but we have a very old water system, and we were breaking a lot of water mains. You know, if we had a mutual aid company opening too fast or whatever, and so the water department actually had a guy on call that it was just for a short time, just so he could understand our operations and we understood what their needs were. But he was responding to all our fires just to see that. So yes, I mean, it's hugely important. Our fire marshal gets involved early on when we're laying out new streets and so forth to make sure that what the city is building works with the way that we're deploying.
Well, and again, knowing your area, you know, John has said it plenty of times when it comes to pre-planning, the first time you're in that building shouldn't be when it's on fire. Same goes for knowing your neighborhood, knowing where your water comes from, and back it up even further when we do organizing the fire ground about knowing what you have on your rig, knowing your weapons. And there are people, BJ, out there, and I want you to comment on this one. They don't know what comes out of the end of their nozzles. And John, you and I, how many times we go somewhere for dinner or coffee and they're showing us their engine. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. We're looking at their engine and go, all right, so that looks like 1.75 inches. What kind of nozzle is that? We've said this a bunch of times on the show, and they'll go, that's a double upside down Fanguli, Elkhart tip, Task Force tip, Ouija nozzle, whatever, you know, all the different brands. And then you see, so what's it flow? And then they start looking at each other. Now the guessing game starts. You know, BJ, touch on that with your rookies when you're training them in the academy. And as a captain in a busy fire department in Louisville, Texas, how important is to know what's coming out of the nozzle? Because there's people out there, BJ, that I swear, and I'm sure you run into it. You ask them and they're looking around like somebody tell me. I'm like, how do you not know what comes out of the nozzle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think knowing the number one, just flat out what the GPM that's coming out of it is huge, because that goes into your first offline selection, right? As you gain experience, you should be able to look up and say, hey, that's a 3 rooms on fire. I can get that with 1.75 inches, or hey, we need to be going something bigger, 2.5. Maybe some kind of blitz attack with a deck gun or a ground monitor type deal and knock it down real hard. But if you don't know what the GPM is, you have no idea with where to start with from that. The other thing is too, we have vindicators on our 1.75 inches, and then we have smooth bores on our 2.5. And just knowing that each one of those lines is going to handle a little bit differently. You're going to have a little bit less back pressure with the vindicator, so it's going to be more prone to kinking a little bit behind the nozzle. And so you have to adjust your positioning and grip a little bit to be successful with that nozzle, to where that 2.5, it's like swinging around a 4x4 post. You can get a lot of it out in front of you before you have to worry about the hose whipping back on you or getting any kind of kinks right behind the nozzle. But if you don't understand that those two are different and they operate different, you're in a world of hurt when you're in, a stressful situation. It's getting hot, you're needing water, and the last thing you want to have to do is open that nozzle and have it, kink right behind you, and you're having to shut it down and reposition. That fire is just getting bigger, and we're not able to protect and cool everything off inside to help everybody out.
Well, I'll say I think there's a lot of embarrassing things that could happen, but I don't think there's anything greater embarrassing wise than not being able to put the fire out or not being able to get water out of the end of your nozzle or not knowing it. We all watch the videos all the time with some people that can't seem to get the hose off their pumper. There's driver operators that can't seem to focus on what they're supposed to be doing. Like we said before, when you turn the corner, I ask this in class all the time, how many people here have or continue or still drive a pumper to a fire? They raise their hands. Okay, you turn the corner and you got fire blowing out the first floor of a 2-story frame. You pull up. What's the first thing you do? And they're like, okay, you set the parking. What's the next thing? Put in neutral. Then we put the pump switch. We put it in drive. We get out, and then we're waiting for someone to say, start water, charge the line, whatever. But you watch some of the guys that can't seem to make that happen. Then you watch people go ahead and stretch hose. I don't think there's anything, to be honest, anything more embarrassing than not being Scott and Terry, you and I specifically, have been to a lot of fires together, and we've always told residents, no, wait. This is going to be like a magic act. Watch this. As soon as that hose, as soon as water comes out of that thing, this fire is going to go away. This fire is going to go out, and it does every time. John and BJ brought it up. Touch on, and again, another one that we always joke about, and we're serious about it being a bestseller of the Functional Fire Company, Scott's book. But John's engine book is probably the best one written for the fire service. Talk about, John, as you talk, the residential versus commercial line, the difference between knowing when to do it. There's still a lot of people out there using residential tactics on commercial buildings.
Yeah, and as we all know, you just look at line of duty deaths, recent or even historically. That's one of the things you'll find on NIOSH reports all the time. Residential fire tactics used at a commercial building, right? So everybody is so used to it. And I mean everybody in the Bronx, everybody in Chicago, everybody in Texas, everybody in California, everybody in the fire service is so used to just pulling, A, pre-connects, because most folks have them, and B, 1 3/4, or I just call it the small line, right? And then the once in a while that you get the commercial building, and I know there's probably some places that have either a district or a battalion or a couple of engines that have maybe mostly commercial, but most folks have mostly residential or a mix. And then once in a while you get that commercial fire. Sometimes people just go, muscle memory. They go right to the crossway. They pull out the 1 3/4, and there they are. There they are on the front of Fire Engineering magazine with an 1 3/4 line. And when it's hitting the building like rain in droplets, because they didn't pull the right line. And never mind the fact that it's harder to pull and it's going to be heavier once you stretch it, and your flow is going to be different, and even nozzle handle techniques are going to be a little different with a larger line.
Well, and all this backs up to you look at Terry and BJ are sitting in the training room at their training facility, at their training field. Scott, you've been a teacher for a long time. All of us, obviously, we love training. We love making a difference in people's lives. I always go back to 88 Engine in the Bronx in the 18th Battalion, John. The guys there practice stretching hose so much, and the guys from Louisville ripped off this idea. In the back of the bay, talk about what one of the guys that we use it in our Battalion Chiefs Academy. There's actually a picture of what comes to training. The prop, one of the guys made, to stretch hose, to load hose in the back of the bay. In a busy ass firehouse in the Bronx, they still do that. They still practice stretching hose. The importance of even that thought process.
Well, it's the same concept that we all talk about all the time, whether it's cutting the roof, whether it's stretching hose, whether it's using your SCBA. The good officers, obviously mandated by a good fire department or a good chief, are the ones that are conducting training, every shift. And I always talk about all that designated training hour is always good, but I know guys like Vigiano and Pete Lund and many, many others. You basically trained all day long. It wasn't like an official training the last day, but at every opportunity, at every turn, they'd be driving by something, he'd tell them, pull over. And they go look at something, and they drive away 10 minutes later. Then they maybe have their training session during the day or during the evening. And then, they'd go to a box. They'd be the third due engine, not doing anything. Everybody's taken up. And he also would say, come on over here, look at this. I've never seen a standpipe like this. And all of a sudden they're looking at something else. And that's what it's all about. It's all about training, being prepared, and muscle memory, and all the other terms and words and phrases that go along with it, knowing what you're doing. And you and I have done it. And Scott and Terry, we've all seen it on YouTube videos and everything else. Guys pulling up to a building and walking around looking for compartments. They open like 3 compartments before they take the thing out that they're looking for. And I'm like, you didn't know that was there. You had to look through 3 compartments to find that foam adductor or whatever it was, and that's because some folks don't do it. Some folks don't train. I don't want to say people don't care, but training is it. Obviously, here we are on the show talking about it. Training is the important part. Whether you now some places go a little bit further and build a little hose bed simulator, or they build my guy just built the roof prop in the back of the firehouse in Sapelman Grove. Movable roof prop, peaked roof, flat roof, you can throw pallets in or do whatever you want to do. There's a lot of ways to do it. And now they're going to know how to cut a roof 100 times better than talking about it or just starting it on the apparatus floor or wait until we have a building that we can go cut up.
Well, we just did our open house. And so anyone who does a public education event, we'll pull out the rescue tools, and maybe, in a certain event, they get to actually, pry some part of a car with the tool, or you let them squirt water. Like we'll do a pub ed event with it, that maybe we set up a line and let somebody hold that and squirt water. And when those people, like you see that reaction from them, like someone starts laughing or they're really shocked or surprised at what just happened, your people shouldn't have that reaction. And I think what Billy's talking about, right, is that when you pull a 2.5 with a smooth bore, you better have an understanding of what that's going to feel like. And if you don't, if you're giddy and laughing at the water coming out of the end of a nozzle, either you're really pumped up about your job, which is great, but it shouldn't be a surprise what just happened. You should understand what's going to happen.
Well, exactly. And this shouldn't be, like you said, the first time you have that in your hands, or you haven't had it in there since 7 months ago when you did either your pump test or you did your hose testing, whatever you had to do. It should be something. I'll go back to nothing else matters. And again, please, folks, I understand the majority of what we do in the fire service when it comes to EMS and everything else, but nothing else matters in a pumper except for the hose and the water. Back in the old days, there was hose tenders, there was ladder tenders, there was something they pull with a pump. Everything gets better when we put water on a fire and we get to that point. No matter what study you look at, no matter what book you read, no matter what video you watch, everything gets better when we put water on the fire. John, go back to one thing real quick here. You said it before about whether you have 6 people on an engine like you do in the FDNY, or you have 3 people, or even some of these places that have the engine couples that only have 2 people. I just taught a department, and when you bring it up, the guys look at you. I'm like, look, I'm not making fun. Look, I always ask, if I could give you 3 guys right now, would you take it? Yeah, I'll take 3 or 4. But that's all you have. So what they have to do is add another engine or 2 to their responses, again, of people there. So they've got to be a little bit more creative with their manpower. But you said something before about whether you have 4 people on the engine or just 1 firefighter riding backwards. If you train enough, I think the hose stretch is just as successful. When you compared Wichita to the FDNY, both of them put out a buttload of fire, and they do it rather quickly with complete variations on manpower, right?
I got to tell you, they don't do it rather quickly. They do it really quickly, and what amazed me when I saw them, I went out and rode out with them a couple of times, was they just got the one guy. They got the one working firefighter and the officer and the chauffeur, and they got it down to seconds, and everybody's paying attention. You go to a job, you go to a run in Wichita, everybody's practically looking at their watch trying to figure out is how long it's taking to get that line stretch. Everybody's paying attention to it. And I've been to places, and we've all been to places or seen places that don't seem to pay too much attention to that. Everybody just sort of like,
I think we had John freeze up there for a second. He's not quite in Bangkok where Scott is, but he's in New York, and it might as well be the same place. But BJ, we're getting close to finishing out here today. But in all seriousness here, and all kidding aside, you're the hardest working dude on this show right now. You're a captain. You do it. You're out there. I mean, I ride the front seat. On the engine where I'm at now, but you're the hardest working person on this show right now. What's important to you? Let's start to summarize this. What's important to Captain BJ McWhorter on hose stretches, nozzles, water, everything? What's the summarize and put those things together? What matters to you out there for you to be successful? Forget you're in the training room now. You're back on your engine.
Okay, so for me, it's knowing that my guys understand what the end goal should look like, right? When that hose is stretched dry, we're knowing that we need the nozzle and the working length up there at the door in an easy, efficient manner for us to push it in, right? Because guess who's moving that line in, right? As a 3-man engine, it's me. So the more those guys can set me up for success to where that pushes straight in the door, we're not wrapped around a bunch of stuff, the easier it is for them on that nozzle to move a whole lot. And the other thing is riding kind of what Chief Sacco was talking about in Wichita, that 3-man engine, we ride that here. I have to have a lot of trust in my guy to know when that nozzle needs to be opened. And I try to preach to my guys that if you're not sure about it, open that thing up, right? We're not going to be able to put out fire with that nozzle closed. And the thing that's going to get us inside is going to be that flashover. And the more we can wet things and cool the environment off, we're resetting that timer on that flashover. And so if you're going to make a bad decision on the fire ground, make that a bad decision with that nozzle open, right? We can dry stuff out. We can't unburn it. And Chief Ashman would pound that into our heads, and we try to pound it into the heads of these new guys that, wet stuff doesn't burn. And as fast as flashover is happening now with these modern fuels, we have to cool that environment and make things better. And that's kind of a change that's been happening over the last 10 years in the fire service. And having those guys understand it, that's one of the biggest things that I try to make sure of, because I'm back there pushing corners and working pinch points, and they're up there with the nozzle by themselves, and they're having to make those decisions. And I want them to make good ones.
Well, and BG, I love what you just said, especially the part about, because one of our mentors, my surrogate godfather, Chief Alan Brunacini, used to say, nothing unburns, everything dries out. Don't be shy with the water. There was a time for a while it was the excess damage and all this stuff, and I'm like, the fire's doing excess damage. Put the fire out. My uncle worked for U.S. Gypsum for like 40-something years, and he used to tease me. He go, "You guys you're saving stuff that has to be ripped out. That gypsum board is only good to a certain temperature. You can't clean it up. You can't repaint it. It's going to peel off. They have to tear it all off and start over." And his whole point was, work on putting the fire out, because as much as the smoke and heat are byproducts of the flames, I understand that. Okay. They do the most damage. That, the smoke and heat is what does the most damage throughout the structure. When you look at how much actually burned, that was huge. I love that you said that. Terry, again, your message on water on the fire, buddy.
Well, I think we've said it before, but I'll say it again: is do the research and the homework and figure out what works for you. If you want my suggestion, find your Billy. Find someone in your department that's passionate about this, and I don't care if he's a firefighter or a captain; doesn't matter to me. Someone who's willing to go out there and do the work and bring you back good information and make your decisions on what your package is going to be, what your hose load is going to be, what kind of hoses. You know what? You want to go to a trade show, stop buying what they're selling you and buy what you need. And I think that's super important, because anyone's going to sit down and tell you that this hose manufacturer, this is the best thing you need, and this nozzle is the best thing you need. How do you know that, right? Like, nobody. If we buy a fire truck, if we're going to change manufacturers, we go drive them, we meet with them, we talk to them, we talk to other people that use them. We figure out whether that particular piece of equipment works for what we're trying to do. And you should have that same mindset when you're talking about hose, nozzles, appliances, or anything else. Do the homework. Then once you make the decision, train on it. The hose prop you talked about having at your station, that's what Billy did here. We built hose trays, so we weren't climbing on and off the engine. So they built the muscle memory of reload and man back when we switched that hose load. And so invest in that on the front end. You'll have far fewer problems on the back end.
Well, I like that message about buy what you need.
Yeah.
I think that's the second hashtag here. We got the first hashtag from BJ with, if it goes out pretty, it comes off pretty. So that's going to be the hashtag of the day. Scott, your thoughts on water and the fire.
I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Terry said, but just in the things we've talked about. I don't care if you're the smallest volunteer department in the country or the FDNY. If you do this long enough, you are going to flow water. That's guaranteed. You're going to have to stretch a line and flow water. So let's get intimately familiar with that. Starting at the hydrant, working with the city, we talked about that. Your hose packages. How is your engine set up to deploy quickly? Having an understanding of what each line will deliver. All those things are critical, and we haven't really talked about, like Terry said, training yet. So make sure we have a system that's user friendly. Then let's get out there and train. As you know, we're very much committed to pre-arrival assignments and riding assignments. And one of the reasons is doing that is so our people rehearse. We don't go to crazy amount of fires like other parts of the country, but I want to make sure that those same people are kind of doing the same things. Talk about your apparatus placement. Rick, you've been over to RC. We got very narrow streets. You fought fires over here. That pre-arrival communication, our first engine will simply say, we're stopping short or we're pulling long. And that tells everybody else how to come in, or we're going to nose in or follow them in. So all those things are hugely important. But if you don't pay attention to any one of those steps, something is going to suffer. So when I go into a department and I look at it, I want to see how the rigs are set up. And then I like to see that minimized zero impact period, the time it takes from when we pull up till we start solving the problem.
Well, and we've talked about many departments, Scott, exactly that. You could sit here with a stopwatch and you know how quick they're going to have water on the fire. And there are, as much as we try to make it sound simple that all you got to do is stretch hose, there are a lot of connections, no pun intended, that have to be made there. Everything from having a driver that he or she knows actually how the water comes in and goes through the impellers and comes out, the other end of a nozzle, and to know actually how many more lines you can pull off your rig by knowing how much water you got coming in and so on. There's so many things that go into it. But when we get back to it, everything goes sideways. Everything goes sideways when we don't get water. Broken water mains, water, the pumper shuts down, whatever. That's the big deal, because you see this fire just go, it's out of control now. It's getting into an exposure. Everything gets worse when we don't get water in a fire. John, as we close things up, go ahead. I want to ask you something else, though, John. Go ahead.
Well, I got another side point that I want to make based on, well, actually what Terry and Scott have both been talking about, about training and knowing what you're doing and being familiar with your equipment. And then you go to these departments that, they have 4 engines, a small fire department, 4 stations, 4 engines, 2 trucks, 1 truck, whatever it is. And each engine packs their hose differently. Or even the worst thing that I've seen, and I'm not even going to tell you where it is, but these places that change the hose every shift. The A shift comes in on Monday, they run the hose the way it is. The B shift comes in on Tuesday, they pull off the pre-connects and they pack it the way they like it. They pack it with the whatever the hell it is. Some other hose packing, hose stretching method that they prefer. Then when the C shift comes in the 3rd day, they happen to like that, so they leave it. When the D shift comes in the 4th day, they switch it back to the other one. This is. I know it's a criticism, and we don't like criticizing stuff. This is nonsense. This is bullshit. No fire department should allow that. Every fire department's got a chief. You know what? Sometimes you got to put your foot down and say, you know what? We're doing stuff the same way around here. If you work in engine 2 and then you get detail for the day, or worse than that, you go to a job with engine 1 and we need a hand over here. You help engine 1. You don't even recognize the hose stretch. You don't even know where to pull. That's important that fire departments, I think it's important that chief officers and field officers as well enforce that. All companies, not all, because you may have a downtown district that has a couple of different things on it maybe than the outlying district does. But for the most part, most fire departments, there should be some standard of the way the hose is packed, the way the hose is pulled, where the equipment is carried. It doesn't always have to be exactly the right. But I'll tell you what, certainly hose line should be. Certainly where you pull a hose line off an engine should be similar or exactly the same as the rest of the department.
Well, and one of the things I think happened was, to our listeners, John got cut off right at the very beginning. We were saying it. What he was talking about, which he said very nicely now, is there are departments out there that change their hose beds from day to day or from shift to shift or whatever. And we all agree that's I think that's a big weakness when you're allowed to do that, when there's no consistency, because if you have different people riding, if you have different people working shifts or whatever, I'm way too competitive to screw up. I don't like screwing up. We were with our friends in Pearland, John, is when you were down and we're doing our scenarios. And one of the things you said, going back to this, is I think you said it where you went, God, I love hearing water on the fire, is how you said it. I love hearing water on the fire. Again, none of that happens if we don't know our hose loads, don't know our nozzles, don't know our water supply, don't spec our rigs right. We don't train, all the different things we've been talking about. None of that happens. None of that happens unless we put in, the hard work that goes behind it. We talk about hard work, do the hard work, and everything else comes behind it and pays off. So let's do this. BJ, if if somebody, if another captain, a firefighter, train officer, whatever, wanted to get a hold of you to pick your brain on, so I heard you talking about this or whatever, what's a good email address, BJ, for them to get a hold of you at?
It's going to be B McWhorter, McWhorter at cityoflouisville.com.
Very cool. BJ, thank you so much. I was excited when I heard Chief McGrath say he's bringing you on. You got to do me a favor. I always ask you need to give your dad a big old hug for me and tell him I miss him. I love him. He's a great man. He's a great guy. There's a lot of firefighters that are going home to their families that are alive today because they worked with and for your dad. So I know you already know that, but I'm saying that because the people need to know that he's a great, great person. So Terry, email address, buddy?
It's going to be BJ at no T McGrath at cityoflouisville.com.
Go ahead, Scott, if they want to get a hold of you. 2, 3, 4, 5.
Scott with 2 T's at fireserviceleadership.com. And I got to bug out. I got to go do my other gig.
All right, buddy. Thanks, Scott. Thanks. See you, buddy. And John, good email for you, buddy. If we lost John, I can help you with that one. It's chiefjohnsalk@gmail.com. I know that one for sure. So, all right. Hey, another great show. Next month, let me see. Next month, we're, let me see, where are we at? We are at November 15th. We're the third Wednesday of the month is our hump day. There's always some great hump days at noon Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget the nightly podcast at fireengineering.com. Just go to fireengineering.com. You're already there if you're here. But check out the ribbon bar at the top, man. I mean, you can go from here to GEMS to Firefighter Nation to Fire Apparatus Journal. I mean, there's so many great sites. So, I'm giving you just a smidgen of what's all available on that website. Check it out and let us know what you think. In closing, we always ask you to please keep the men and women armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. We want to, before we sign off, thank our friends at Safariland. You can check them out at safariland.com for helping us bring this show to you today. It's a great group. And again, they're the one motto that they use, together we save lives, is absolutely true. If you go to their website and if you've dealt with them, that's what they do. And the last thing we want to remind you is never forgetting means just that, never forgetting. So be safe. God bless you. And we'll catch you next time.